Conservatives tend to believe that human beings are flawed, original sin. We're deeply flawed. We aren't ever going to be perfected. We can try to encourage people to behave well, bring them up to behave virtuously, but there isn't going to be a perfect society because these human beings are imperfect.
Alistair, welcome to the show.
Hello.
What is the Salisbury Review? Because on first glance, you'd be mistaken for thinking that it's a quarterly review of the ongoings of rural Wiltshire. Would
Right.
that assumption be incorrect?
Well, if you Google it, you're in danger of coming up with a magazine from Salisbury, Wiltshire on local pubs and things like that, which is fine. But you have to tap in the Salisbury Review and then it comes up. So I think we might need to work on our search engine and just make sure that we come up first. But yes.
And what is the magazine about? Obviously, not the rural ongoings of Wiltshire.
Yeah, well, it's named after the Marquis of Salisbury, who was Prime Minister at the turn of the last century. So that's who it's named after, and he was chosen by because he seemed to epitomise to the group which set up the magazine, which was the Salisbury Group, a more traditional sort of conservatism, to the Thatcherism, which was then coming on stream. So it was set up in the mid-80s by various people, including the then Marquis of Salisbury and Roger Scruton, of course, the eminent conservative philosopher, as a sort of antidote to Thatcherism. So that's why it was set up, and it's been going. And Roger was founding editor. He was there for about 10 years, and then he moved on. And we've had ups and downs since. I'm hoping that we can now get back to what it used to be, which was a forum of conservative ideas, fairly highbrow, but lighter pieces as well. Seems to be lacking in the current media, certainly in this country. I don't think there really are any serious magazines of conservative thought where anything can be said. I don't think there are.
I certainly came through to the magazine through reading Roger Scruton, and it seems that he is certainly a big signpost on directing people towards the review.
Yeah.
Obviously, there was the antidote to Thatcherism at the time. Was there any other views or aims of the group when founding the magazine?
I think it was mainly that they felt that with Margaret Thatcher, that she was very much a liberal. The centre was markets and more markets, which might have been needed at the time to some extent, given what had happened before, but that they were in danger of losing traditions, customs, the things that ought to matter to conservatives, a sense of community seemed to go by the wayside. I think even the other year I heard Norman Tebbit actually say that he thought that's something they had lost sight of, that they'd really lost sight of, that the loss of social relations, social trust seemed to go by the wayside. They were so obsessed with markets and privatizing and the city and so on. They forgot about the needs of ordinary people, not just miners, but everywhere, and the traditional values, for example, family values, which the market doesn't always serve very well.
For someone coming to it for the first time, the slogan or term conservative is a pretty broad one.
Yes, it is.
So
Yes.
if we were to distinguish what and where the review differs in its conservatism from, say, Churchill's paternalism, Thatcher's economics, and now Trump's view on immigration, that's a pretty much a broad view. What are the key nuances that the review is differing from and views at which it's putting forward?
I think where we differ from the predominant liberal conservatism, which is very much markets-based, and you hear that from the Conservative Party, even from Kemi Badenoch, that if you go back to Edmund Burke, the English conservative tradition, Burke, through him, then through Michael Oakeshott, Roger Scruton, it's very much based on not on the market society, though markets have their place, but that the central thing is the love of what is ours, our affections, loyalties, relationships in local communities. The, these are the things which are central to real conservatism, rather than simply markets and making money and making profits, which is nice, but there are things which are more important, values which matter more than that. Yeah, also that we are fundamentally social beings, and I think traditional conservatives share that with certain people on the left, what you might call left libertarians, as opposed to post-Marxist liberals on the left. That culture matters, and we are social beings, and all of our values come from a cultural inheritance, because they can't come from anywhere else, and therefore culture matters, and that needs to be protected. It needs to be preserved, fostered, and you can't just leave that to the market. And I think that's where the recent generations of political conservatives have gone wrong.
The politics of home, as it were, is something
Yeah.
in which you've touched on there, and the review has spoken a lot about, and certainly Roger Scruton has written a whole lot about. It seems that the modern world is coming more and more homogenized, be it through its politics, through its architecture, even a similarity of city centres across
Yeah.
the world. That sense of home potentially has been eroded. Obviously, then, if we think about the markets, etc., the markets is what drives a country forward. How can we balance the two, between needing to balance the national books, as it were, but then also this politics of home?
Gosh, yes. I think it's keeping markets in their place, and especially global markets. So markets matter. Markets are very efficient for delivering economic goods for people as um, um, workers and consumers. But there are other things to human life which perhaps are even more important, sort of love, relationships, affections, loyalties, passions, pastimes, interests, sense of shared memories. All of these things count for nothing in markets. And we can do both, I think. But the state has to be involved. It doesn't have to be a bureaucratic superstate, but it needs to intervene to protect, to help local communities, and sometimes prevent global players coming in and taking over everything. So, so I think it's all about helping people locally to develop their own communities, um, industries, work, so forth, on a more local level. And Roger Scruton, I think, said, I heard him speak shortly before he died, and he said, you can't let global markets loose on people's communities, because they'll be destroyed. And but it doesn't mean we're anti-capitalist. It doesn't mean we're anti-market, that we want to have a commune at all. It just means that the market has to be kept in its place, because there are other values that are actually more important. Of course, it matters to, people want to be have a reasonable quality of life and so on. Wages, goods, and so forth. But when people look back, the most important things in their lives are obviously not how much they earned. It's who they loved and their families, and what they achieved in their lives, that sort of thing.
How would you then legislate
Ah,
on or against the erosion of those values and identity? Would you not sort of be left with sort of now Trump's protectionism?
so there is method in it. That's hard to see sometimes, but yeah. For example, Kemi Badenoch made a speech in which she was saying that married women, women having children, for example, at work, could be a burden on their employer. and which they are in a sense. But that's that's a liberal view of the market. Women aren't just working in the marketplace. Women, families, fathers actually have an even more important role, which is bringing up children, and they should be supported and helped. That's a burden on business. Tough. It matters more. So that's just one example. We should have a shared allowance. Married couples or even unmarried couples should be able to share their allowance, so that if one wants to stay at home in the early years and help bring up the children, they should be encouraged. That sort of thing. At the moment, it's in this country, it's very hard, very expensive to bring up children. You get no support whatsoever. Colleagues of mine at work, one of mine is from Germany, who's just had a baby, horrified at the lack of support in this country for families and parents, couples with young children, for example. I heard the other day, I think the government has stepped in to actually nationalise a producer of semiconductors up in the north. They've rebranded it with a name which begins with O. I can't think what it was, but that sort of thing. There are, governments must get involved. We can't just hand it over to the Chinese or to global markets. So yeah, the national interest matters, and it should come first. We shouldn't just flog off all our assets. Heathrow Airport is now just belongs to a holding company with interests all around the world, which is interested in making a profit. Fine, but maybe we should have an interest in our national airports and our national utilities like Thames Water are actually run. They should be run in the national interest, some of these organisations.
Just to pick up on, say,
Yeah.
the childcare point there,
Yeah.
if something like that came into place, there was more help, more support for the young parents or
Yeah.
whoever, whatever situation that there was. First thing you could see is the headline saying government nationalizes parenthood, or, there's too much governmental interference within parenthood. How would you
Mm.
then balance those two things?
Well, I think the problem at the moment is a lot of people can't afford to be parents, which is why our birth rate is plummeting. It's very expensive to be a parent, and we should be encouraging it. And yeah, and also it's about having a living wage. If you go back a generation or two, go back to the 1970s, say, a where the man worked and the woman usually stayed home and looked after the children. That was a standard thing. The man could the average worker could earn a living wage, and he could and they could afford to do that. And that world is gone. And for average people, and I'm one, uh, um, both parents have to work, and so things are different. Things are much harder. In the old days, what one person could work, the other could stay at home, and that's all gone. And it's I think parents really do need support, and um, uh, I think genuine conservatives would support that. Otherwise, we're in danger of not having any children. That's how things are going.
Just to pick up on that point of the old days of, say, the man going out to work, the
Sure.
woman staying at home, that would be considered a traditional setup. I just finished reading a book about serfs in sort of across Europe at the time, and that traditional setup it probably only lasted for about 100 years, and then
Yeah.
before, say, the agricultural revolution or even the industrial revolution, both the man and the woman went out to work every day because they had to, because otherwise there was no possible way that they could get any
Mm.
food that night. So,
Sure.
on the whole conservative point, I guess what I'm getting at is, from when are we conserving? Is it just the last few hundred years? Is it, for the last millennia? Because there's so many peaks and troughs within the
Mm.
day-to-day lives of people and the culture of people.
Well, if you go back further, of course, children went out to work. A very, very much younger age, and very young children would be on the mother's back in the fields. She'd be helping in the field, and the child be on her back. But the child was with the mother, certainly in those days. And I'm certainly not saying that it should be women staying at home or men working out to work. It doesn't have to be, of course, but parents have to be able to afford to have children. It's as simple as that. And how exactly we do it, I'm not sure. But at the moment, really, a lot of people, a lot of young couples cannot really are struggling. Really, are thinking whether they can afford to have children, and which is why largely why our demographics are the birth rate is really plummeting. So yes, yeah,
So if we chart, say, back the last couple of centuries, if we were to look at key figures of this conservative movement, say Edmund Burke would certainly be
yeah.
a champion, as it were. Who else of the last few hundred years would you put
Benjamin
up
Disraeli, I suppose, is
there?
the father of one nation conservatism. It's very much one, and yeah, in and more recently, Michael Oakeshott in the earlier post-war period is a huge thinker. Really, anyone interested in conservative ideas or politics should read him. Incredibly articulate, brilliant. You don't have to agree with everything, but really stunningly good. No jargon. There's no jargon. It's all clearly argued. You know, um, and the same with Roger Scruton. I think that it's sometimes more difficult to argue conservative ideas because conservatives don't believe in a simple utopia where everyone is equal, everyone is perfect, there's no oppression, no power. And of course, this usually turns out to be a police state and a uh, um, total nightmare. But even so, conservatives tend to believe that human beings are flawed. Um, Original sin. We're deeply flawed. We aren't ever going to be perfected. We can try to encourage people to behave well, bring them up to behave virtuously, but there isn't going to be a perfect society because these human beings are imperfect. Where conservative thinkers, I think, have the advantage is that they tend to argue, as I said, without jargon. You don't have buzzwords. It's argued in clearly, articulately, and sometimes in a more sophisticated way, because we are starting with human beings as they actually are. Then some thinkers on the left tend to get into these into wooden expressions and buzzwords and solidarities and all these great wooden words which actually need to be unpacked, which are used as slogans, but actually, um, when you analyse them, actually don't can be rather empty.
You've recently taken over the Salisbury Review, Alistair.
Yeah,
In what position did you find the review, and in what position would you like to steer the review in?
I think what it's possibly lacked is its mission is first of all to be a forum for conservative ideas that to openly talk about anything, um, serious discussion about conservative ideas, drawing on all conservative traditions. Um, so that's part of it. So I think we lost that for a few years. So I'm trying to get back to that and have people from this country and also from Europe and America to thinkers on the right who are interesting to actually discuss conservative ideas. But also, um, our role is to basically defend the national culture, the idea that this country has a cultural inheritance, which is basically English culture and civilization. Which is a very dangerous thing to say, but our job is to talk about that and to defend it, and to give voice, to give expression, which is something we always have done very well, to the sense of loss that a lot of people feel, which is not talked about very widely, which people steer clear of, but it's very important because millions of people have this sense of loss that they've lost something in the new multicultural utopia that we're heading for. Something has been lost and they've been left out. I think it's very important that we talk about that, and we certainly do, and we have done that. and plan to carry on doing it. And you don't see that anywhere else, I don't think. Even in the conservative press, media, people steer clear of it. Even though they talk about it privately, and they think it, they don't say it, because you're in danger of being called a racist or a fascist or a xenophobe or a nationalist and all the rest of it. But it's important.
So
But
this
those are the twin things: conservative ideas on one hand, and talking about the national culture and maybe what we've lost.
this sense of loss in which you allude to, I'm sure a lot of people will, their ears will peak up and probably agree.
Totally.
What is it in which they have lost, Alistair?
It's
In which
common culture. It's a sense of having a common culture, which in the past, newcomers to the country, people who came, my mother, for example, my wife, have been integrated into that culture over time. And what's differed in the past couple of generations is we've had a different sort of immigration, which has led to people not being integrated into a broad common culture, but into multiculture, in which which different cultures are celebrated. Nothing wrong with that, but we've lost that sense of, I think, social cohesion that comes from a common culture. And a particular feature of the multicultural experiment is it's a little bit odd because all cultures are celebrated except for one, which is the host culture, which we're not supposed to mention. We celebrate diversity. Not quite sure what that means, but as soon as people talk about a host culture, or red lights go on, and this then ties into the sense of repudiation, not just only in this country but other Western countries, of European cultures and civilizations for being racist and colonialist and white privilege and all of this. So it's very complex, but there is this sense of loss. And I think this loss of a common shared culture. It doesn't mean everyone has to do the same thing. It doesn't mean everyone has to go to church. It doesn't have anything to do with it. It's just a sense of having memories, history, things in common. It's not about color. It's not about race. Our last editor was black. He was a very proud he was an English gentleman. That's he would describe himself as that. It's not about color, it's not about race. It's about a sense of attachment to a particular country and its traditions, its customs, its ways of doing things. As simple as that. And I think that's something people feel all around the world.
one thing I am acutely aware of, having spent quite a lot of time on the country's motorways, is vernacular housing. So using the local brick
Yes.
for whatever house there is. So, for example, my home county of Dumfries and Galloway is all granite. So Galloway
Yeah.
granite. Cotswolds is the famous yellow limestone, or even Perthshire's brown limestone. And what I'm acutely aware of is that all new homes are built very similarly and use the same
Indeed.
materials. So they could be anywhere in, say, Newquay, Norwich, Newcastle, or Nairn, going all the way up the country. But you wouldn't know that they were there because they all just look the same. And I feel as though it's when looking at a house or looking at the architecture, it bounces emotion at you. And so then you
Mm,
feel what the architecture is telling you. I
mm,
feel when it's all very homogenized, I just feel quite drained. But when I can go around to an area and see what the architecture was like, say, 100 years ago, just before the war or whatever, when it was very localized,
mm.
I just find it a lot more enjoyable.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see, with shopping centres, town centres in this country, they're all identical. You get the same shops, or because it's chain stores covering the whole country. But again, in France, it's very different. It's very different, and we go from one region to another, you see the difference. And I think there is more of an effort in housing to houses to blend in and to use, to be part to fit in with what was there before. And certainly, and you have independent retailers, independent pharmacists. You go into pharmacist in France, it's locally owned, and it's absolutely beautiful. It's absolutely glittering, gleaming. The service is incredible. Here, you get this clapped out old. Am I allowed to mention the names of stores. There's no problem.
Of course.
Boots. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's like something from the 1960s or 70s. Hasn't been updated. W.H. Smith was the same, but Boots is just it's appalling because it's a chain store. I think it's American owned now. So why can't we have local, local businesses, local initiatives, and back that? And if a national chain wants to get involved, it has to be on terms of local people. And we have it with our supermarkets too, of course. With yeah, so as you say, we have to move towards localism. And you don't have to be a conservative to think that, but it is part of conservatism. But I don't think it's part of liberalism, which is the dominant ideology, which is markets, 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 which is damaging.
So this whole markets. Economists reduce things and people down to numbers,
Yeah,
and
factors of production. Yeah,
yeah, and say stuff like emotion, sentimentality. On the surface, there are traits associated often with the left, but it was really through reading Roger Scruton that
love.
it brought me back in, as it were. And
Yeah,
I love that Burkean quote of "We're living in an ongoing relationship between the dead, the living, and the
yeah,
unborn."
yeah.
That whole balance between rationality and economics versus the heart and the soul. Where do you and the review find yourselves there?
Totally, yeah. And this wonderful this thing that Roger Scruton said. He writes, but he said it in his speech I heard just before he died. Uh, he said that the essence is conservatism is a philosophy of love. Um, Socialism is a philosophy of resentment. I thought that's very. Of course, it's grossly simplified, but if you start with what people love and what they're attached to and their affections and loyalties, you start with that and work out. You're going to come to very different conclusions. The ones that if you're motivated by, we've got to make everyone equal. It's terrible that people aren't equal. You've got to start and work. You're going to come to a very different endpoint. So it is all about starting with people as they are. Yeah, of course you want, and to try to have a society in which people behave as well as they can do. You want to bring people up to be in the old fashioned sense virtuous, to actually behave well and to live well. Of course you do, but people are humans. They're not and love. I mean, people fall in love. Their friendships are nothing to do with rational planning, and nothing to do. They aren't equal. They just happen. It's instinct. It's passion. It's an urge. And this is the heart of conservatism, I think. And there isn't much, as you said, there isn't much room for that in the liberal market. It's or indeed in the it it in the commune there isn't, I think, much room for that. All that matters is everyone's equal and no one has an advantage or a privilege or that's all that matters. And it is really a philosophy of resentment. That doesn't mean that we should have a deeply unequal society, which we have. That's wrong. We have to have that more in balance. But in any healthy society, but there are going to be differences, and some people will have advantages, even privileges. That's not necessarily a bad thing, providing the privilege goes with obligations. And that's another very old conservative idea, slightly aristocratic, but it has its place. Um,
Yeah, I remember reading, and Lord Andrew Roberts now, wrote very eloquently about Churchill, for example.
yeah,
And, he was assigned lots of privileges at birth just by the nature of his birth, but with that came with huge responsibility.
mm,
And he felt that throughout his life. And
yeah,
that gave him back, certainly in the public domain. Whereas I feel now that essence of public duty, public devotion,
mm,
is lost a lot from my generation. Do you know, why would you go into politics when you get endless public grief and not very much pay when you can go into private equity and make 10 times the amount and have none of the public grief?
sure. Mm. And connected with that which is something that a lot of people have written about very powerfully, which is the rise of the meritocratic elite. Nothing wrong with choosing people on merit, obviously, But when you have we have a new elite, the meritocratic, new professional class who are very talented. It's all done on merit, and they're up there, but they don't feel much obligation towards anybody else. In fact, they quite often feel contempt for the average worker who hasn't made it, and we've lost something there. And a lot of people have written about that very powerfully. In fact, I was looking him up just now. Christopher Lash, the Revolt of the Elite, is an incredible from 1995. Incredible book, but a lot of people have written about it, and it's very important. How you deal with that, I'm not sure. You can't really go back to an aristocratic elite, but there is a bit of a serious problem with a new elite, which is extremely privileged, enjoys all the privileges of Western civilization and the culture, but finds it fashionable to support open borders, and because you get a supply of cheap labor and domestic servants and that sort of thing, you get free travel to your villa in Tuscany, and so on, and so it works very well. The open borders liberal society works very well for the elite, but it doesn't work so well for people up in Bolsover or in Middlesbrough who are competing for jobs lower down and houses. It doesn't work so well for them.
And we see that, I think, a lot with the amount of people leaving the UK, for example, due to the increase in tax and the reduction of, say, security and safety. Okay.
Yeah.
So, what I would put to you, Alistair, is say you had worked hard all of your life, say you had a family and responsibilities, but do you know the UK, say London, it's not as safe as it used to be. Do you know you could send your kids to school, and by the time they got to school, the phones could be robbed out of their pockets. And oh, by the way, your business is just getting taxed to high hill. Why not just go to Dubai and
Yes.
0% tax? I love the English culture, but really, it's costing me too much. What would
Lots,
your take be on that?
well, lots of people are thinking that, sadly. But there's also internal movement of people. The word, another thing that the people that you're not meant to talk about is white flight. It's a very crude term, but there's a big demographic movement going on within the country of people fleeing the cities, getting out and going to nice places like Dorset and Devon and Gloucestershire, which are becoming more and more homogenous than they even were before, including a lot of bourgeois liberals very keen on getting out there, talk about diversity, but are not so keen on living in hyper-diverse neighbourhoods themselves, like to send their children to schools, which are overwhelmingly homogeneously white. What's going on the ground isn't quite the utopian vision, and so that's serious. Crime is it's serious. It's not just that it's getting worse, people perceive, but it's the denial that there's a problem, and people can see it. My son got badly beaten up last year over a mobile. Had to go to Max Fac at St George's Tooting, fantastic emergency services we have, thank God. It's not safe, and it's a worry, and there is a sense that the police that are not taking it very serious, are not chasing, are not doing what they should be doing, and that's a widespread feeling. Whereas if you go back a generation or two, the policeman, my God, you respected the local Bobby, was a real figure. Used to come to local school, real respect. Where's that gone now? And it isn't just young people; it's middle-aged people. Ordinary people think, "Oh, the police are on our side," and that's really worrying. The same as in France. It's a serious this social breakdown, lack of cohesion. It is very worrying, as you say. Taxes, that's another issue, but it's very sad, and it's worrying that this sense that we're really starting to break down. We're losing that sense of social cohesion, being a society where we look after each other. It's very complex, the reasons, but one I would suggest is I don't think the multicultural dream has helped. I don't think mass immigration has helped either. because we haven't integrated people into a common society. That's one reason. But no, I'm not blaming people coming to the country. My wife is an immigrant. My mother is an immigrant. I've no problem there. It's mass immigration and not integrating people and neighbourhoods. As I say, people are moving. People are moving with their feet, including bourgeois liberals. Like the friends I know, they're all on the move into those nice leafy little enclaves around London, the edges of London, and out into the country. It's happening, and when we're turning a blind eye to it, no one's talking about it.
If we were to drill down, say, on that specific person who is making a good amount of money and wants to invest in, say, the local economy, that's
Yeah,
obviously through
yeah.
making jobs, or invest, just through civic societies,
So
but he's just getting taxed too much.
absolutely.
What would you say he should do? Should he invest in, in the local economy, or should should he just take his money and leave?
We can't answer that question. We can only hope that people would stay. But the tax problem, I don't know what the answer is. We're in such a mess. Everything's out of kilter, isn't it? I mean, if again, I keep saying, if you go back a generation, say to the 80s, um, Britain has always grown a little bit less than its competitors. We haven't ever been on fire in the post-war period, but we've done okay. We have steady growth. The average person could afford to buy a house. Young people could afford to rent, and they could afford to put money down on a mortgage. The whole thing is out of balance now. Everything's gone wrong, and I mean, there we have huge numbers, millions on benefits. A lot of people working who are not earning a living wage, who actually then have to get state support. Well, that's wrong. People. How has all this happened? And part of it is that we've become dependent on cheap imported labour, and the whole thing goes out of balance. Whether it's housing, or it's people not being paid a living wage anymore, and therefore the state has to top it up. People on 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet, and housing is unaffordable for the average person. Average young person is not going to ever. Are they ever going to own a house? Are they ever? And this was never the case before. Everything has gone wrong. Everything is out of balance, and I don't know how you fix it. I really don't. And of course, taxes are too high. And the awful thing is, we have high taxes, but the public services are not exactly luxury, are they? Holes in the road. We have our French friends came recently, were horrified at the state of our roads. They said, "What is this? What's happened?" They were absolutely horrified. The car was, and this is London. This is not, you know, out in the wilds. Everything's and Farage, bless him, has said it. He said everything seems to be broken. I don't think he's the only person to say that, but everything seems to be broken. What's gone wrong? I don't think I can answer that in a. I haven't got any easy remedies. It's very sad, but
You spoke of the 70s and 80s there. Was it the Thatcherism that was brought in? Was it obviously migration point of view? That was New Labour. What's gone wrong? Why is things out of kilter?
I think it's partly a lack of long-term investment. Everything's been short-term. That's one thing Thatcherism got wrong. It was all short-term speculation, short-term investment. There wasn't any sense of investing long-term. As, for example, they had done in France and Germany, certainly, investing in apprenticeships, looking long-term, having relationships between local banks and businesses. It was speculation, and that was bad. That aspect of Thatcherism, all short-term, and we still have that short-termism, very little long-term investment compared to other countries in the private sector or in the public sector. So that's part of it. And the other is importing labour. My election speech for the SDP, the hustings, the figures for the NHS for years, if we import 2/3 of our doctors and half of our nurses, carers, nearly all of them, of course, but we import them. We don't train our own people. So it's cheap, get them in, but the whole thing is then going to be unbalanced. You know, and we have coffee shops in every corner. That's nice, but are the people working in them earning a living wage? You know, if everything's sort of out of balance, and how we get back, I don't know. It's tragic, and the housing situation. It wasn't like this before. So what's happened? We maybe haven't built enough homes. Part of it, but it is more than that.
Speaking of the SDP and your
Yes.
stand at the election, can you give us a little insight into the SDP? What do they believe? Are they, say, economically left and socially conservative?
Yes,
How?
definitely. Socially culturally conservative, more economically, more social democrat. As for example, I suppose German, European social democrat. And I think what it was I was trawling for an article, the different parties at a previous election, and the Conservative. It was just silly slogans. It was just vacuous, complete rubbish. And I went on to the SDP side. I think Rod Liddell in The Spectator is the most famous SDP member, and he mentioned it. So I'll look it up. And I was absolutely amazed. I was gobsmacked at the manifesto, how it seemed to be real conservatism in every sense. And the other thing that impressed me was it was deeply articulate, intelligent. There was no jargon. There's absolutely none. It was clear, sensible, intelligent, serious ideas, and so it's genuinely socially conservative and more to the left on economics, which is whether that's possibly less conservative, but I'm not. I'm fine with that, provided they're not. We obviously don't want the bureaucratic state. We don't want a command economy. We're not talking about that, but the state should be involved in one way or another, as it is in a lot of other successful countries who don't actually leave everything to the market. That includes Singapore, funny enough, where I think 90% of the housing is state-owned. I'm not suggesting that, but the idea that Singapore is a free-for-all is not quite true. They have national investment funds. It's interesting. And South Korea, Germany, France, the state has an important role. Doesn't mean we have to have British Leyland again. It doesn't mean we we need lame ducks, but it does mean that we can't leave everything to the market. And so the SDP free speech is another thing very big on. People should be able to express their opinions in the words that they choose, in the words that come to hand. And that was a very good speech by William Clouston, the leader conference the other year, who's written for the very good writer for us a few times. This term, to express your views in the words that naturally come to hand, is very important. You should be able to. But prosecute people for their behaviour, for aggressive, threatening behaviour, by all means. Expressing an opinion is not a police matter. It doesn't matter how even if it's hateful, objectionable. People have the right to have an opinion, and this used to be what the classical liberals actually believed. John Stuart Mill. It's fundamental. The right to open debate, that even one person has a different view, which is unfashionable, hateful even, they have the right to express it. Because nobody is infallible. And that's the famous on liberty from John Stuart Mill. Liberals used to believe that. They don't anymore. Conservatives, I think, are okay with that. But it's got to be no ifs, no buts. Freedom of expression is vital. And the SDP are very strong on that.
How does, say, a classical liberal differ to a modern conservative? Because on the surface, they seem rather similar.
Liberals, even with John Stuart Mill, he believed that the freedom of the individual is everything. And to achieve that, the individuals, all customs, traditions, was all dead weight should be cleared away, because that inhibited the individual from expressing themselves. And John Stuart Mill says that. That's a classical liberalism. So it's all about being free to express yourself. That's fine. But part of that was clearing away customs, traditions, which will get in the way of that. Conservatives have the opposite view, which is that you can't really be free in any meaningful sense. Have values which will enable you to choose, rather than just being an instinctive animal, a bundle of desires. To actually have values, there's only one place that can come from, and that is from customs, traditions, and inherited culture. Where else does it come from? You can be a rebel, of course, and reject it, but you have to start with something inherited. And I think that's a huge difference with classical liberalism and conservatism. Culture matters.
From, say, classical liberalism to modern conservatism to the future,
Yeah.
what is your take as the editor of the Salisbury Review on the future of conservatism? So at the moment you have, certainly on the right, you have Farage championing
Yeah.
his court, and then you have Kemi Badenoch championing her court as well. Where does the review fit in amongst those two icons of the future?
I'm not sure we sort of go in between or in that sense. I think Kemi Badenoch and Nigel Farage both sound on woke. Would absolutely agree with that. On freedom of speech, yes, definitely. Kemi Badenoch doesn't. I'm not sure she has much sense of there being anything beyond the market. And a deep, looking, I suppose, to encourage to a sense of affection, love for all the best things about this country, a sense of shared memories, a sense of a common culture. I think the problem with Farage, I think, is that his instincts are often very good. He has an instinctive sense of that, but there isn't any philosophy behind it, and I think he's too much of a market man. Though the interesting in the Reform Manifesto, there is quite a lot of intervention. Surprising amount. I don't think any of the figures add up at all, but there was quite a lot. That the state should be involved in key services, utilities was in there, which I'd agree with. The sense that traditions matter, customs, traditions, our national culture matters. It's where we get our values from, and it's what people could be integrated into as they have in the past. And that's a tragedy, that if you forbid any mention of a host or indigenous culture, in England's case, English culture and civilization, there's nothing for people to integrate into. There's nothing to bring people together. And that's a tragedy. I don't think there's any sense of that in Kemi Badenoch, and I don't think Nigel Farage articulates. I think he senses that, but there's an underlying philosophy, a conservative philosophy, underlying him as such. He is a populist. He is. He grabs, and he's brilliant at that. But it's I don't think you can govern on the basis of that. On just picking up the feeling of the people and going with it. It's got to be a bit more than that. And I also, by the way, disagree very strongly with Farage and Tice on climate change. So that makes us, or me certainly, I'm a green conservative. It doesn't mean I believe we should deface paintings in the National Gallery and all that at all. And if I were a gallery attendant, I'd be in there tackling the person that was spraying it. I don't know why they, yeah, climate change. I think if you believe in that the world's climate scientists are engaged in a giant worldwide conspiracy, a giant hoax, you might as well believe that the world is flat and there are aliens. The Apollo moon landings were faked, which quite a few people do, and there are alien cities on the far side of the moon. If you go onto the websites, they're almost identical the way they are constructed. But that's a different issue. But maybe we don't want to get into all that. So I very strongly disagree with reform on that. Net zero. Yeah, of course, there are lots of problems. We need to talk about that. I'm very much pro nuclear. But on the actual issue of climate change, I think Richard Tice is really way out there.
So, Alistair, as we come to a close, is there a message, a positive message, in which you can leave on, or are we left to just look at the past and try and take the best of the past to the future, but realize that a lot of it will just fall through our hands like sand?
Yeah, as you say, it's not living in the past, or things progress, but it is learning from the past and being aware of the past and being aware of that cultural inheritance, and maybe having a sense of affection, a sense of belonging to the country that produced that inheritance. So it's your job to actually take things forward, not wipe the slate clean to produce a new society for a new perfect human being, but to actually take the best of that inheritance and to bring it forward, carry it on, and express your love for that, your sense of belonging in a different, in your own way. But we have to be somehow, the great words of Michael Oakeshott, that we are formed in the mirror of a civilization. We are human beings. That is the only way you can actually have values and have some ballast to you. Is that you are formed? We are formed in the mirror of civilization, as as individuals. You can't just make yourself up out of nothing, and that's the great lie, the great conceit of left liberals, transgressive freedom. Just go and do what you want, but you have to come from somewhere. Otherwise, you're just a massive instincts, and you have no identity, no sense of belonging. I don't think that's feasible, and it's very sad when, um, even being a rebel is fine, but to be a rebel, you got to know what you're rebelling against. And so, yeah, I'm not sure how positive that is. But then, anyway, we are a forum for conservative ideas. I don't think that there are any other forums for conservative ideas at the moment.
The great thing about pessimism, as Roger Scruton once said, is that you will always be left been agreeably surprised. So perhaps
Yes,
a
yes.
pessimistic ending is quite an apt ending. Alistair,
Mm.
thank you very much for coming onto the show.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you very much.